Well, I'm delighted to introduce my friend, Katie Meek, the Reverend Katie Meek. She's a missionary with the Global Ministries of the United Methodist Church. She's there in Sierra Leone, where she's a lecturer at the Bishop Werner School of Theology, as well as the Deputy Registrar, a new title for you. Mm-hmm. And that's all at the United Methodist University there in Sierra Leone. And we have a link, of course, you can find it in the See More description, and we have it there in print at the bottom of this interview, where you can find out a lot more details, blog posts and information about how to support Katie. But Katie, I want to welcome you, and I'm so excited to have you as a part of this worship service. And I'm excited to have this chat with you and just to catch up with you. It's so good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. And I'm glad to be with Wellspring. I've been in your sanctuary many times and enjoyed worship and meetings there and all kinds of different things. So feels not exactly like coming home, but almost like coming home. So it's nice to be with you.
One of the themes that we talked about, that you and I talked about, and that we think kind of relates to what we were talking about earlier in worship, is this idea of delight. And in mission work, I think that's not necessarily the word that comes to our mind the quickest. But how are you realizing that delight is an important piece of mission work? How are you finding delight there with the people that you're with in Sierra Leone?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think people think missionary and they think, oh, someone who's suffering for the greater good and, serving the poor and all of those sorts of things, which I wouldn't say that I'm suffering, although it's not easy, right? But and I'm certainly serving, but I consider this not that different than what I did back home in ministry as well. I think we have this mindset that it's this big thing, but really, honestly, it's kind of just a really fun, adventurous life. And so I was thinking about where I've seen and found delight in Sierra Leone, and a lot of it's cultural, to be honest, and most of it's relational. But I have three examples. The number one is dancing. So when I first came back to America, after 6 months of worshiping in Sierra Leone, I was like, why are we just standing here still? Because worship is so much more fun when you dance. And I'll say that I was really nervous early on about the dancing. And the longer I'm here, the more I just it just becomes this natural thing. You just start moving, I used to worry people are looking at me and I was at the front and I'm a terrible dancer and all of that. But, and today actually, so we're recording this ahead of time. Today was the last day of the semester for my students. And we had a worship service for chapel. And I got to record some video of them letting off steam. The way that it works is, life is hard in general. And just to be able to come together and sing music and let off steam, and especially right at the end of their, semester, the end of, 7 or 8 exams that they've taken, and to watch them just let it all out. It's beautiful. It's delightful. So that's one. I have 3 for you. The dancing.
And then also to feel like, it sounds like delighting in that has made you really feel like you have a part, almost like a part ownership in that culture, because you're living there and you're with those people. And it just makes me wonder, is that something that you had to work on? Is that something that kind of came naturally to you right away, or did you have to cultivate it over time?
So yes, I was actually talking to someone recently who read The Alchemist, and they say whoever wrote The Alchemist says when something's right, it's easy at first, and then oftentimes what ends up happening is it gets harder. You start to actually realize that the challenges of integrating in and all of that. So I would say that was my experience. When you first come, it's oh, everything's magical. And then after a little while, it's really easy to start to recognize the differences as challenging. And so I would say it's actually taken me a lot of time an effort, honestly, to sort of get to where I could truly, fully experience the delight. And what that has taken has been time. But so I'm reading a book by Dana Robert, Dr. Dana Robert, who's at Boston University, about sort of mission as faithful friendship. And as I'm reading it, I'm like, right, this is obvious. Obviously, mission is about friendship. Obviously, that's part of life. That's part of. But I think as an American, it's so easy to think, okay, I've come here to have a job. I have a job to do. Right. And then when I'm done doing that job, I can go home and cocoon back into my, like I've made my apartment that almost looks and feels a little bit American, Mm-hmm. So, and even in the book, she quoted someone, the frustration with like American mission teams, going to other places, because at night they would cocoon back with each other rather than actually living and being in the community. And that's been my experience. I've had to, and honestly, I've been here three and a half years, and I've developed really good relationships at church and also at work. But beyond okay, so I'm here to worship, or I'm here to do this thing, and we have great rapport. It's been really easy to cocoon back in, and also to make friends with the expat community, because those are just easier relationships. Yeah. You don't have to work as hard. Right. So, so my experience has been, it's actually taken a good bit of time. And also, honestly, just in the last year or so, I've gotten to the point where I'm like, no, you have to stay longer. Mm-hmm. You have to be out of your house longer with them. You have to remain in their presence longer, because it's in the remaining that you actually experience that they let you in. It's about building trust in that way.
So for people at Wellspring, as we kind of consider our own mission field, it makes me want to ask this question of, how can we all, as disciples of Christ, learn to live in delight and also lean into some of those discomforts, like you talked about, all that, the adjustment period for you, and that kind of that middle space where things get really hard. Mm-hmm. How can we all be doing that in a way that, that we can have as like a take home, or as an idea that we really hold on to?
Yeah, I would say two things. Number one, the word remain, I think, is a really good word. Stay longer than you need to. Mm-hmm. And also stay even if it feels awkward. That's been my experience. I tend to leave when it feels awkward, but stay. So that's number one. And number two, I think there's this thing that I learned in missionary training about conflict resolution, but I think it applies just in general, especially if you're dealing with someone of another culture or race. And that is, don't assume that your first assumption is right. Oftentimes we have an idea of what's happening, but the longer that you stay within a culture, you'll probably realize actually that's probably it can be nuanced, even if it is true, and if it's a negative judgment, it can be nuanced in 18 different ways. So the benefit of the doubt, number one, and also don't assume that your first negative assumption is going to be right, or positive, even really. Mm-hmm. And that's, I've seen that sometimes with like mission teams who come to Sierra Leone. They'll assume certain things are happening, and they'll say, oh, I can't believe that was happening, or I can't believe this happened. And I'll think, well, that's not what was happening. And so in my training, there was a couple of questions to ask yourself of the assumptions that you've made. Number one, is it true? Mm-hmm. Number two, essentially, there's my cat. Number two, his name is Tex, by the way. Good. So number one, is it true? Number two, does it have to be true? Right. So you give yourself like a couple of layers of self reflection and critical thinking, because oftentimes your first assumption is not going to be right. And even if you land on, yeah, I think that's true. Well, does it have to be nuanced in the same way that you want to nuance it? Just because it's different and you probably don't fully understand doesn't mean that you should automatically reject it. And that's been really important for me. Like sometimes I'll get frustrated and I'll make assumptions about what's happening. And then I'll learn a couple of weeks later or a year later, oh, right, I was not right about that. I didn't understand that cultural thing that was happening. I thought it was about this, but it really was about that. So I think the benefit of the doubt is something that we give our own. And I think if you want to make other people your own, you give it to them too.
That makes so much sense. And I know you're there and you've been there for a while. We have a huge difference of culture just between political divides in America right now that I know you're probably aware of even from over there. And so I'm picturing those questions. Is that true? And does it have to be true? Great questions to ask yourself when you encounter somebody who thinks differently than you politically, or brings up something to you from a political or ideological standpoint that really threatens your worldview, or seems off to you, seems wrong to you, seems biased or baseless according to the way you think. Just asking yourself, but is that really true that they're off in that way? And if it is, even if I'm technically right, does it have to be? Do I have to put them in that bucket of somebody that I can't relate to and I can't be with? And so if I were to ask myself those questions and then remain with people, that would be transformative for sure.
Yeah, and I'll tell you, in my experience, it's something that you sort of have to do over and over again, because there's going to be misunderstandings a lot. But if you can, and another thing, Martin Marty talks about he talks about mutuality as the tenderness of people. And I have noticed a marked difference if I see them as my people and have a tenderness toward them. Number one, they respond in like and in kind. And number two, everything goes better. So I think that the sort of those sorts of things where you give yourself permission to look past the differences and love them, it's really beautiful and good.
It is. Well, I delight in that idea, and I've delighted in this conversation. So I just want to thank you for joining us today. And I know people will be connecting with you in all the ways that they can on the internet. Be sure to check out postmodernmissionary.com to learn more about Katie. And Katie, thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you too. God bless you guys. I love y'all.
All right. We love you too. Talk to you later.
All right. Bye.
Bye.